I hope you guys are doing great, and so am I. And it's been quite a long time since I filmed one of these videos. Like, I actually wanted to film so much content on this particular channel, but it has been like I had new ideas in my head that I wanted to kind of like go through. But I was going through a phase when I was just making content one after the other, and I wasn't really getting any output out of that. So I kind of like wanted to rebrand this channel a little bit, and I also have my Hindi channel in case you guys have been watching me for quite some time now. That channel is going pretty great. Recently, my Instagram also started popping off. I had like, I don't know, like 50, 100 followers on Instagram back in the day. By the time I'm speaking this, I have over, I think, like 46,000 followers on 3rd of September. In the middle of all of this, I also thought like, hey, I should revive my main channel. So in this particular video, I'll be talking about which iPad you should be buying as a student, because ever since I bought my iPad, I have this iPad Air. This is iPad Air 5. This is the one with the M1 chip in it. This is the latest iPad. So ever since I bought this iPad back in like end of March, I've got this question so many times, like a plethora of times, people asking me which iPad they should buy as a student. So in this particular video, I'll be going through every single iPad that Apple has, because trust me when I say this, Apple used to be this brand who was known for their exclusivity. iPhone will just make one phone in a year, not like the other brands, not like the way Android does it, like hundreds of phones. But all of a sudden, what I feel is that they have way too many iPads, and all of them are very similar to each other. It's kind of like a bit confusing. Which iPad should you buy as a student? If you hop over to Apple's website, Apple mainly makes 4 iPads. One is the iPad Pro, the other one is the iPad Air, the next one is the iPad, the last one is the iPad Mini. But without any bias, I'll be sharing my honest opinion about which iPad is meant for what particular kind of audience and which iPad should you buy as a student. This is the cheapest iPad. If you look at this one, it starts at $329. The downside of buying this particular iPad is that it doesn't have a true tone display, so the colors are not as sharp as you might think. The other problem is that it doesn't have an anti-reflective coating, or as some people like to call it as anti-reflective coating. If you visually look at a particular screen, there's no gap between the layer that you touch and the actual screen. But the problem with this particular iPad is the fact that since it doesn't have an anti-reflective coating, there's a gap. When you write with the Apple Pencil, you'll straight away notice that there's like a level of latency, and it doesn't feel like you're actually writing on a screen. So I don't really like that, and this reason alone makes no sense for me personally to buy this particular iPad, because when you're putting like $300-ish, it's first of all, it's not cheap. It's $329. If you're looking to buy an iPad around $300, I'll suggest you do not buy an iPad. Rather go and buy an Android tablet, because the problem is it's not just $329. You probably know, considering that you're watching a video on the iPad, this Apple Pencil alone, this is the 2nd gen Apple Pencil. They launched it back in like 2018. They haven't updated it since then. This is $129. Even the previous generation Apple Pencil cost a whopping $99. So this by no means is cheap. So even if you go with the base model iPad, what you're actually paying is not $329. You're paying $329, and then on top of that, you're also paying $99, which is about $430, roughly speaking. I'm not taking taxes and stuff into consideration, but you're paying $430 for this particular iPad. So you're almost close to like $500-ish, considering that you also have to pay taxes and stuff, shipping, blah blah blah. Just a little spec bump from this one is the iPad 10th generation. Now, this iPad costs, this is the iPad 10th generation, or Apple simply brands it as the iPad. It's weird. That's the reason I'm making this video, because every single one of these iPads have sort of like very little differences, and if you genuinely think about it, you'll notice that it's kind of like a bit confusing. Like seriously, no joke. So this particular iPad, or let's write this Apple iPad 10th gen, avoid any form of confusion, this cost $449. And by the way, I'm just talking about the base model, because I don't feel any reason to upgrade from the base model to the next model. Either it's from Wi-Fi to cellular, or even upgrading the storage in some sense, because Apple charges so much more money than you think about it. Just upgrading from 64 gigabytes, the one that I have right now in my iPad, which is more than enough for most people, to be honest, just upgrading from that to 256 gigabytes, Apple charges like $150, which is a lot of money for an iPad. So $449, and then you also have to buy $99 for the Apple Pencil. So you're somewhere paying close to $550. This iPad may seem like the best iPad, considering that it is cheap, and of course it has some features of the iPad Air. But there are a couple of differences or shortcomings that you also have to consider. First of all, if I compare it straight away with my iPad, the one that I own, iPad Air, you will notice that yes, the screen size is same. Yes, it has liquid retina display, but it doesn't have P3 wide color gamut. The problem with that again is that the colors won't be as sharp as you might expect. The other thing is, it again doesn't have the anti-reflective coating. Number one shortcoming coming of this particular iPad is again no anti-reflective coating. The second reason why I didn't buy this iPad, even though it's the latest iPad in all sense, because it has A14 chip and the one that I have has M1 chip. So the difference in CPU cores, as you can see, is 8 core versus 6 cores, and in GPU it's 8 cores versus 4 cores. Then the main problem, like seriously, genuinely speaking, the main problem, if you go down, you look at it, it supports Apple Pencil first generation, whereas the iPad that I currently have supports Apple Pencil second generation. And you would be like, but what's the problem with Apple Pencil first generation? First of all, the problem is that you cannot do this magnetic touch thing. It's a physical pencil that most people lose because they cannot magnetically clip it on to their iPad. Secondly, and the one that does not make sense, is the fact that you can charge this pencil. It doesn't magnetically charge since you have to charge this pencil. It charges via lightning connector. This iPad, as you can see, only has a USB-C port. So you may be asking me, how I'm gonna charge this particular Apple Pencil? Since the iPad has a USB-C port in it and the Apple Pencil has a lightning port in it, guess what? You have to buy a dongle. Back to the dongle lifestyle. That's one of the reasons why I never bought this iPad. It makes absolutely zero sense. Price difference is not as significant as you might think. It's $449. And then I have to buy the Apple Pencil, so it's $559. iPad 9th Gen does not make sense, so let's just cross it off. I have no clue why Apple thought that it would be a good idea to have Apple Pencil Gen 1. So I can't buy that either because it makes no sense. And even if you go like, I'll show you, like for example, if I'll go buy and click on this buy icon, like just after that it says add Apple Pencil adapter. Why do I even need to buy this particular dongle? Like why? Yes, I get it. It's not that expensive. It's $9. If I was spending $550 on an iPad, I might as well spend $9 on a dongle. But it makes absolutely zero sense to buy this particular iPad. And for the people out there who might just be like, hey, you're making a big deal out of this. When you're using a particular piece of product, a tech product in this case, and you're using it on every single day, like a daily driver, even the most minor inconvenience can cause a lot of trouble. When I'm using a particular tech product, I just want everything to be flawless because I'm using it every day. I don't want those problems. So buying this iPad does not make sense. As you can see, even the Apple brands like, hey, the price point of the iPad is from $329. The first two iPad do not make sense. If you're buying the iPad just for the fact that you want to buy it as a multimedia device, I'm just going to watch YouTube videos and binge Netflix. The very first two iPads that I was just talking about, this iPad 9th Gen and 10th Gen, are completely fine. There's absolutely zero problem with that. But the moment you think about, hey, I'm going to use this Apple Pencil, whether it's Gen 1 or Gen 2, that's when you begin to notice that, hey, it does not make a lot of sense to buy this iPad in the first place. So from this particular point, you'll begin to see that this iPad has the most amount of features given the price that they're charging. This iPad or iPad Air 5th Gen. So this iPad obviously has M1 chip. On top of that, it has all those features like P3 white color gamut, true tone, anti-reflective coating, all those features. It's buffed up with 8-core CPU, 8-core GPU, 16-core neural engine. Cameras, nobody thinks about cameras. That's the reason I didn't even mention about the cameras in the previous one, because let's be honest, nobody really uses a camera on the iPad. Then center stage, you might as well have seen those videos about center stage on the iPad. Yes, it's okay if you're using it on FaceTime, all that kind of jazz, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest for me. It doesn't have that front camera like it has on that particular iPad, which is something that I forgot to mention. It doesn't have a camera over here, it has a camera over here. So when you're using it on a horizontal position, it actually makes much more sense to have a camera over there, but it's okay, like whatever. Like who's using the iPad for FaceTime anyway? Everybody uses their phone or laptop, but it's okay, I'm cool with that. Now comes the last. If I were to compare it with iPad Pro 11-inch, and let's put 12.9 in comparison as well. So this iPad that I mentioned in front of you before, iPad Air, costs $599, and then also on top of that you have to buy the Apple Pencil, which costs $129. Of course, I'm excluding taxes. This would cost $730. This iPad. The next one, you have iPad Pro 11-inch, and also I'll simultaneously write iPad Pro 12.9. So if you were to look at iPad Pro 11-inch, you will notice that there's a ton of features that it has from the iPad Air. It's like a spec bump, but of course you're paying a heavy price for that. It starts off at $799. The advantage it has over the iPad Air is the fact that rather than having 64 gigabytes by default, it has 128 gigabytes. Moreover, it doesn't have a 60Hz display like the one I have on my iPad. To be honest, for me, I haven't used like a 120Hz display on an iPad since I don't play video games. I mostly use it for like note taking and stuff, so it doesn't matter for me. But in case you're coming from a 120Hz display, it might feel like it's not as smooth as 120Hz is. It has ProMotion, or as Apple likes to brand it, or simply like a 120Hz display. As you go down through the spec sheet, it has the M2 chip. Now the M2 chip, particularly for the iPad, is not that big of a deal, you would say, or like a spec bug, considering that most of you guys are using iPad OS, which is basically iOS, and you're not using Mac OS. Because if you were using Mac OS, M2 chip would make a considerable amount of difference over the M1 chip, since you would be pushing your device for 3D renders, all that kind of stuff. But for most people, even when I use DaVinci Resolve on my iPad to edit like YouTube shorts and stuff, I'm not pushing it to the extreme. I'm not editing like 4K videos, one on top of the other, color graded and speed rammed with motion blur, all kind of stuff. Nobody does that. Let's be honest about it. It has more cameras, even though I'll be honest, like nobody uses cameras, but since we were to mention, let's mention it. Then on top of that, it has Thunderbolt. In case you're connecting like a display and stuff with it, I think you would have probably seen the demos, considering that you're watching a video on the iPad. Like if you were to look at my iPad screen, it has this feature of Stage Manager. Basically what you can do is, you can use your iPad like a Mac. You can multitask between different apps. Like I can open the clock app, I can open my files app, let's say, I can even open my, DaVinci Resolve. And then I have, as you guys can see, I have all of these open all at once, close, and then I can switch between all these apps. But I really don't prefer using Stage Manager because in my personal experience, Stage Manager sucks up a lot of battery. So this is one of the major reasons I just don't prefer using Stage Manager. But in case you want to use it with an external display, for some reason, even though I haven't really used the iPad with an external display, because like it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, since if I were to use it with an external display like I'm using my laptop, I might as well use a MacBook or an actual laptop. This is a conversation in itself, but the fact that a lot of people that I see on the internet nowadays who are just buying like iPad with an Apple Pencil, with the Smart Folio keyboard or whatever Apple calls it, you are making a device which is not a laptop, which is not your regular Mac. You're putting an Apple Pencil on top of that, you're putting an extra keyboard case on top of that, you're making something which is not a laptop into a laptop. Makes absolutely zero sense to me, because in case you want to make something that's not a laptop into a laptop, you might as well buy a laptop, like duh. Then on top of that, it has Face ID. The next thing, which is quite impressive, it has 4 speakers. Even though the speakers on this particular iPad are pretty loud, but in case you want to go full in, rest of it is just pretty much same. Like in case you guys can see it, everything is pretty much the same. Of course, it has more storage options because it's the Pro, as Apple likes to brand it. The rest of it is just the same. After the iPad Pro 11-inch, we have the iPad Pro 12.9. It has all the same benefits that I just mentioned. I would not write it since it's the same, but it comes at a price of $10.99. Now you can see it's almost double the price of one that I have. Now it obviously has all of these features, but on top of that, it has Liquid Retina XDR display, which is absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. So it has XDR display, and then on top of that, everything else is just the same. Like seriously, everything else is literally just the same. You can just go through Apple's website and you will just notice that every single one of those features is just the same. But now comes the question, and the reason that you have been watching this video. I said that you shouldn't buy the first 2 iPads, considering that you're a student. You have to buy the Apple Pencil along with it, and it hinders your note-taking experience overall. So I didn't recommend this iPad and this iPad, the iPad 9th gen and the iPad 10th gen. Then you have to make a choice between iPad Air, iPad Pro 11-inch and iPad Pro 12.9-inch. For most students, I would say this iPad, first of all, is expensive, like crazy expensive. Also considering that you have to buy an Apple Pencil, which adds $130 on top of that as well. So this is extremely expensive. A. B. The screen size on this one is massive. If you look at this iPad, this actually feels like an A4 size sheet if you look at the size of my hand. But with that particular iPad, the biggest problem that I faced, like when I was looking at the iPad, was the fact that it was just too big. Like I'm buying the iPad for portability, but the fact that I have a 13-inch iPhone sort of kind of like defeats the purpose of having minimalism in the first place. For students, I would not recommend buying the iPad Pro 12.9 because it's double as expensive. Now, buying the iPad 5th gen and the iPad Pro 11-inch. Which iPad should you buy? Should you add the extra $200 to buy the iPad Pro 11-inch or the iPad Air? For me particularly, I went with the iPad Air, and the number one reason why I went with the iPad Air is because I didn't really care about the promotion. I didn't really care about the extra 64GB of storage. I didn't really care about the fact that it has 4 speakers over 2 speakers. Yes, that's an upgrade, but is that upgrade worth extra $200? That's the reason I didn't upgrade. And now that you've watched the entire video, now you'll realize why I bought this particular iPad. Because when you buy this iPad, you can buy it about $700. But I didn't buy it at $730. I bought it at $590. How? Even though I live in India as of now, I called a relative of mine and they were kind enough to buy me this iPad off of Best Buy back in March when Apple had a sale. So this iPad, which was selling back then for $599, was on a sale at $100 off for $499. And this Apple Pencil that was on retail at $129 was selling for $89 at a $40 off. I paid a net price of $590. That's the reason I bought the iPad Air. If you were to look at Best Buy even as of now, it has the exact same deal. You can buy the iPad Air at $100 off at $499. Yes, you can still get the Apple Pencil at $89. So on the basis of that, you're getting this iPad at $590. But if you were to look at the iPad Pro, as you guys can see, the iPad Pro, it is selling for $759, which is not $799. Of course, it's a $40 off. But then you also have to buy the Apple Pencil for another $89. Now that's $850. Exactly, it would be $848, but that's roughly $850. Now think for yourself, are you willing to pay extra $260 for that M2 chip, all these features that I just said, for another 64 gigabytes, for that promotion, which you're mostly never going to use, but because most applications aren't optimized for that, the M2 chip, like even the M1 chip, is more competent than you think. It can get every single job done. Then on top of that, you have more cameras. You're not going to use the cameras. Then you have Face ID, Touch ID, Face ID, for me one and the same thing. Then you have 4 speakers over 2 speakers. Now does that make sense for you to spend another $260? I don't think so. And I went through the same reasoning back in the day, and it made a ton of sense for me to buy the iPad Air instead of the 11-inch iPad Pro. And pretty much the same reasoning goes for anybody who wants to buy the iPad in India. You can buy the iPad, put your credit card in, for roughly speaking about 50 to 53,000. The iPad Air that I just talked about, and another 10,000 for the Apple Pencil. You can get it around 60-ish thousand, the iPad Air. But the Pro would run you around for at least 80,000. So you can again save that 20,000 rupees here in India as well. So this video is pretty much it from my side. I hope this video will simplify your purchasing decision as far as the iPad is concerned for students. But that's pretty much it for this video. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye. Peace.